All right, I'd like to give you all a belated welcome. Now, there are some thanks that we should give, and first, of course, to our wonderful star-studded lineup of participants who finally got their breakfast after a long delay. We are thrilled they are all here and happy to hear from them. Secondly, to the various Claremont Graduate University staff who have made this possible. Anthony Penta, who is recording up in the corner there. Deja Darrington and Angie Anderson, our excellent event organizers. Our Dean, Lorianne Farrell, and the Chair of the Department of Religion, Tammy Schneider, who is here, who has graciously merged her endowed lecture, the Bramley Lecture, with this conference. I also want to thank the Chen family, who have been generous supporters of the Mormon Studies program for years now, and without whose support this conference would not be possible. And finally, and especially, 3 PhD candidates in our Critical Comparative Scripture program. Heather Burrow, Rebecca Call, James Yulee, right here. This conference was their idea. They conceived of the panels. Even the title of the conference, A Plurality of Scripture, is theirs. So all of you presenters, you can know it's not my fault you are here. It is their fault. They picked you, in fact. And they've done really remarkable work. They will be chairing these panels, and you will hear from them shortly. So I want to just take a few minutes before we get started to orient you to the conversations that I had with these students as we were conceiving of this conference. 2 of our faculty here, Dr. Schneider and Dr. Rakaya Khan, who is also here, teach courses in our department designed to interrogate and introduce students to the concept of Scripture. One of these courses is actually called What is Scripture? And it was in those classes that the idea for this conference was born. Now, from an emic perspective, that is, from within any given tradition, the answer to that question might seem obvious. But once we start comparing religious traditions, it gets far stickier. We might ask if there is some sort of tangible or ineffable quality the Tao Te Ching, the Quran, the Book of Mormon all share. Or we might note that the word Scripture in English refers particularly to the Bible, and that Westerners tend to think of all Scripture as being reflective of or derivative from the Bible in some way. Now, this conference, of course, compares Mormonism, which is a term I'm using not to refer only to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, but to all the various religious movements that root themselves in the Book of Mormon, to other Scripture-focused traditions in the United States. And I think there are 3 points of interest in that comparison with regard to distinctively Mormon Scripture and other types of Scripture that are relevant for our discussion. The first is the notion of religious authority, which at the point of the emergence of the Mormon tradition was linked to the production of Scripture. Terrell Givens has argued that it was the existence of the Book of Mormon that validated Joseph Smith's claim to distinctive divine inspiration, and that the book is as important as a sign as for its content. Now, there has been more recent work arguing that his idea there might be overstated, that in fact the content of the book was more important than he gives it credit for. But nonetheless, I think we should consider the notion that the idea of a Book of Mormon signaled that Joseph Smith was a prophet by enacting the Bible, by presenting Joseph Smith as, I think most particularly perhaps, as a Jeremiah figure, someone who produced Scripture that was written down. Similarly, Joseph Smith and those around him spoke of the Book of Mormon as a companion to the Bible, and in so doing, they identified their new faith as a religion in a way that American Christians might recognize. And that point, that the emergence of the Book of Mormon in its earliest form, bound and printed to look like the Bible, and here is a replica of the first edition of the Book of Mormon, points us to another aspect of Scripture, and that is the idea of Scripture as an object. Joseph Smith's golden plates, the sort of bibliomancy the New England Puritans might have engaged with. Is Scripture just text, or is it an object? Does a cell phone become Scripture when you open a Bible app on it? If not, why do many Christians treat the Bible in special ways? Why has the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints formatted the Book of Mormon to look like the King James Bible, with double columns, verses, footnotes, gilded pages, onion skin? Here is a fascinating object. This is what Latter-day Saints call a quad. That is, all 4 books that Latter-day Saints judge as Scripture in a single volume, bound together, identical formatting, identical pages. This is actually my wife's. What does that mean when you flatten the distinctions between the Bible, Book of Mormon, Doctrine and Covenants? Whether one thinks of Scripture as simply text, or, as Marshall McLuhan said, the medium becomes, in some sense, the message, it's clear that Scripture is bound up with materiality in interesting and important ways. Scripture is not simply language. It's not disembodied. Last, Wilfred Cantwell Smith has argued that Scripture is not a quality that text holds on its own. Rather, Scripture is the mode of relationship between a text and a community. And again, we see, I think, the broad Mormon tradition as a useful example here. It's a community that has turned some texts into Scripture and has decanonized formally scriptural texts at other times, making Scripture a rather shifting category, something that has to do, I think, with identity. Scripture is important for reasons social and collective, as much as cognitive and informational. The common practice of Book of Mormon pageants, which we will hear more about later today, illustrate that Scripture can be something aesthetic and communal, a process, rather than something simply that you read. So we will be exploring all of these ideas in greater depth over the course of today. In the panels that follow, I'm delighted to say we have a range of scholars, theologians, historians, anthropologists, theater directors. We'll learn a lot about Scripture.